This story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when the quiet one stops waiting for a turn and starts building the ground everyone else stands on. Have you ever been left out and turned that into your power? Drop your moment in the comments. Let's hear the wins that didn't need a stage. I pulled the tape from my wrist, slow and precise, watching it curl around my fingers like it still had somewhere to go. The locker room smelled like eucalyptus liniment and damp polyester. We had won, the scoreboard said it all, but you wouldn't know it from the silence. The team drifted around me, laughter and energy tangled somewhere else, in huddles I wasn't part of. A few feet away, the captain slapped palms with the striker, muttering something about their combo in the final quarter. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. Not one met my gaze directly. My shirt clung to my back, half drenched, half dried. I folded it anyway. I'd led recoveries, intercepted the counter, assisted the play that turned the game. All of that. Still, I was invisible. Again? I tied the laces of my cleats slowly, methodically, even though I wasn't putting them back on. Each loop a ritual, each knot a reason. My heartbeat slowed as I packed my bag, not from peace, but practiced numbness. The coach came in late, holding the same clipboard he always carried but never truly used. His shoes squeaked once against the tile floor, loud and clean. The noise cut across the dull chatter, and heads lifted. He didn't speak right away. He rarely did when he had something to say that wasn't strategy. He cleared his throat. As per tradition, he began, scanning the floor rather than our faces. The leadership group has concluded the team cohesion assessment, and after some consideration, we'll be revisiting the lineup for next quarter's starts. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. Devrin, you're being rotated out of the starting 11. It's not about performance. You've done excellent work numbers-wise. It's about rhythm, chemistry, protecting the locker room environment. The words didn't land like punches. They didn't sting like betrayal. They just hovered there, dull and heavy, like fog that settles into your lungs until breathing feels like a decision. Someone coughed, another cleared his throat. The air was thick with pretense. I zipped my bag slowly, letting the sound fill the room. I didn't ask who voted, I knew, and that was the worst part. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate, again. I stood up. Not quickly, not slowly. The room gave me a half-inch of silence, and that was all. No one said a word, not even the ones who used to train extra with me, who'd once praised my field reads and spatial cuts. No one dared meet my eyes. They didn't vote against me, they voted for each other. I slung the bag over my shoulder. The weight wasn't heavy, it never was. What crushed me had no mass. As I stepped toward the door, the captain offered a glance that pretended sympathy, but missed the depth. His jaw was set like he was proud of the decision, proud of the unity it preserved. The door made a soft, slow sound as it shut behind me, echoing off the corridor's painted brick. Back at the apartment, I didn't turn the lights on. The windows were open. The city outside murmured its own story, a quiet one, full of indifferent cars and midnight street lamps. I dropped my bag by the wall and walked over to the shelf. My cleats stood there, lined up like soldiers, the studs still flecked with dried turf from tonight's game. I crouched, touched them. I didn't move. They looked ready, still willing to run, still shaped for purpose, still waiting to prove something. My reflection blinked in the window pane behind them. The shadows cut through my face, split between the faint light of the outside world and the silence of the room. I was never playing the game they were playing, I said, to no one. There were no tears, no broken glass, no pacing or yelling into the dark. Only stillness. Because I understood now. This wasn't a one-time slight. This was the architecture. Charisma, connections, chemistry. They were trading in currencies I didn't carry. My discipline, untranslatable. My silence, mistaken for arrogance. My precision, a threat to their spontaneity. So they voted, again. And I let them. Because somewhere, beneath the ache and the heat rising in my throat, a thought moved like cold water. If the game is built to reject you, rewrite the rules. I stood up, Picked up my bag again, set it down beside the desk this time. I opened the laptop. The blue light of the screen filled the room like a quiet prophecy. The cursor blinked. A new folder, new document. I didn't know what it would become yet, but I knew what it would undo. Strat Vibe, that's what I would call it later. Back then it had no name. Only purpose. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving, just long enough to catch my own reflection again in the laptop screen. The same face they'd looked through on the field. The same expression they called unreadable, unapproachable. Fine. Let them speak in whispers. Let them celebrate each other. Let them build clubs of noise and nods. I'll build something that doesn't ask to be chosen, only obeyed. Outside, the streetlights flickered yellow and back again. The city stretched on, unaware of who had lost what or who had decided not to lose anymore. Inside, the cleats stayed where they were, upright, untouched, waiting for a game I would never return to. The light from the laptop screen held the room like a second moon, dim, sterile, precise. It brushed across the framed photograph on my bookshelf. Our university team lined up in summer uniforms, my shoulders squared beside players already turning slightly away, the smile on my face half trained, half hoping. I stared at it from across the room without moving closer. I hadn't noticed before how small I looked in that photo. Not in stature, in presence. The silence was clean now, not the kind that follows betrayal, but the kind that clears space. I sat down, pulled my chair in, and let my hands settle over the keyboard. The cleats by the door still hadn't moved. My breath, measured and unhurried, matched the slow pulse in my throat. If they needed votes to silence me, then they were never in control to begin with. I opened my footage archives, years of match tapes, sorted chronologically, categorized by opponent, weather condition, field size, each one labeled not with sentiment, but statistics. Ball recovery rate, lane compression density, fatigue drop-off curves. I hadn't realized how long I'd been building this library, not as a trophy room, but as a map. Click. The screen filled with the final match from last season. We had lost barely. I had watched it that night on loop, angry at our shape collapse in the final 6 minutes. Now I watched with detachment, not for blame, for patterns. Frame by frame, I tracked spacing where the forwards drifted wide, where our anchor dropped too deep, where I adjusted position 4 seconds before the breach. They hadn't noticed it then. Most still hadn't. Not their job to see it, I reminded myself. They're not built for it. I was. I minimized the video and opened a new file. The blank window blinked. Waiting. I titled it without flair, SV Prototype V0.1. Below that, I wrote one line, center a line. Measure contribution, not charisma. I didn't need more mission statements. The work came fast, not fluid, but certain. Lines of code stacked like steel beams, one on top of the next, not to impress, to withstand pressure. Strat Vibe wasn't going to be flashy. It wasn't built for the market. It was built for the margin. The place where effort vanished into silence, where players like me lived and died on unnoticed movement. Around 3:00 a.m., the city's murmur had dimmed to occasional tire sighs and the low tremor of a late tram passing beneath the street. I stood and stretched, then walked toward my shelf again. The photo hadn't moved, but my gaze had. I took it down, slid the back panel open, pulled out the photo gently, folding it once, then again, until it disappeared into my palm. I placed the empty frame back on the shelf. Not broken, not discarded. Rewritten. I reached for my phone next. Fingers hovered over the screen before pressing down, slowly one chat at a time. Team, game updates, leave group. Locker room jokes. Leave group. Block contact. Midfield analytics crew delete thread. The notifications stopped, the background hum of their lives, inside jokes, performance reels, nights out, faded into digital static. I stared at the empty screen and felt no regret, only air, and space, and clarity. They weren't mine to lose, they were rooms I was only borrowing. In the corner, my printer clicked awake as if startled, then quieted again. A false alarm. Even machines, it seemed, reached for routine in the middle of change. I sat again and reopened the codebase. This time, I wasn't thinking of me. I was thinking of a younger version of myself. Someone watching a screen, counting passes, noting shifts, waiting for recognition that never came. I was writing for him, for the quiet ones, the overprepared, the invisible spine of every team who are told they don't fit. The cursor pulsed steadily. Make the system see what people choose to ignore. It wasn't going to be a product, not yet. It would be a filter, a lens that ignored smiles, cliques, and choreographed celebrations. It would track effort across every square inch, adjust for role context, account for fatigue scaling, measure heat maps of cohesion and not presence. They wouldn't want it at first, it would threaten them. But data doesn't beg. And one day, someone would use it not to argue, but to act. As the first sunrise bled across the distant rooftops, I looked out the window, the color of the sky somewhere between soft gray and frostbitten gold. It didn't feel like a beginning, it felt like a correction, like the world was being rebalanced, pixel by pixel. A new message arrived on my phone, one of the benchwarmers, someone I used to train with. "Tough break, man, you know it's not personal." I didn't reply, I let the screen dim. Not out of bitterness, out of understanding. If they had to remind themselves it wasn't personal, then maybe it always had been. The monitor's glow lit my face again as I leaned back in the chair, gaze steady. This won't bring me back to the field, I thought. It will make the field answer to me. The morning after I'd built the first operational layer of StratVibe, I printed the calibration model and pinned it to the wall, right where the team photo used to hang. There were no faces in this one, only vectors, zones, heat blooms overlaid on formation diagrams, a lattice of cause and effect. It was beautiful, in a way no celebration picture ever was. No false smiles, just movement and consequence. The laptop clicked faintly as I opened the original logs. The screen flickered. The hinge cracked on the right side, held together with strip tape and precision. Every time I adjusted the angle, it tilted slightly to the left. Like the machine, too, had learned to live off balance. I didn't sleep much that week. The first emails went out to a dozen college clubs. Not the funded giants with pristine turf and press teams, the forgotten campuses, programs where players trained under rusted lights and coaches used clipboards older than their players. I offered the system free, with full support, not because I wanted to be generous, because I wanted data. Raw, messy, honest data. Most didn't reply. 2 did. One of them, the Ravendell Titans, sent back a voice note instead of a text. The coach's voice cracked through with the kind of exhaustion that made me trust him instantly. "I'm not expecting miracles, but if your thing helps me keep knees intact this season, I'll run it off a potato battery if I have to." I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was real. The first test session happened on a Tuesday. The field was a patchy expanse behind the dorms, half grass, half regret. I watched from the sideline, hoodie up, laptop balanced on my knees. The air smelled like damp chalk and cheap detergent. The coach barked drills, pacing the touchline like a tired sergeant with a clipboard full of hopes. I wasn't introduced. I didn't ask. My name was buried in the back end, login access, nothing more. StratVibe ran silently. It didn't need a voice. It watched, it learned, it flagged latency in sprints, marked cohesion lags, predicted overuse patterns. Midfielders were overextending in the second cycle, wingbacks were drifting too far apart during full field switches. The system pinged these in quiet amber. No alerts yet, just signals. By Thursday, one player had been reassigned to a reduced run pattern. His hamstring strain, caught 2 days before it would have sidelined him. The coach glanced over during warm-ups and asked, not unkindly, "That your system?" I nodded. Once. He scratched the side of his neck, squinting into the dusk. You sure you're not part machine? I didn't answer. He didn't need one. Word spread in quiet corners of the league. A second team picked up the trial model. Then a third. Each added layer to the system's machine learning. The more it saw, the more precise it became. The injury rates dropped first. Players who used to sit out half the season were running full games without spikes. Then came something less measurable: positioning harmony. No more collisions, no tangled plays. The ball moved like it had somewhere it belonged. One assistant coach, an ex-player with a gravel voice and a scar down his shin, muttered during scrimmage, "Feels like coaching from the grave, like someone's guiding us from under the grass." I heard him, didn't respond. He wasn't wrong. I turned down 2 podcast invites and a radio interview within the first 2 months. One of them offered a small payment. The other wanted a guest column called Brains Behind the Stats. I archived both. I wasn't building a brand, I was building a structure. The wall above my desk now held 5 printed graphs, laminated and pinned where medals used to hang. Each one charted a different team's progress: injury decay, reaction fluidity, cohesion elevation, stress compression, substitution reliability. Each one was a quiet war won. I didn't tell anyone, not even the coaches I was helping. I don't need to be seen. I need the system to speak for me. One night, while updating the fatigue index, the screen froze mid-sync. For a second, my own reflection stared back. Unshaven, hair falling over one eye, hoodie pulled to the chin. I stared at the image not for vanity, but for comparison. I didn't look like an athlete anymore. I didn't need to. I was something else now. Not a player on the field. Not a name on a lineup. I was the rules under the game. The reason behind every substitution. The silence before every decision. A ghost in the algorithm. At the end of the 3rd month, I received a forwarded email from one of the team interns. This subject line was a coach's note. Don't know who this Devrin is, but his system sees things faster than I do. He's either a genius or he used to be invisible long enough to notice what the rest of us ignore. I stood up from the chair, walked to the window. Outside, the campus next door held floodlights over a match I wasn't watching. I could see the ball travel, could sense the patterns even from a distance. Triangles forming, pressure collapsing, players overcommitting without knowing. It used to hurt, seeing it all and not being part of it. Now it felt like proof. And yet I still hadn't called anyone back, hadn't reached out to the ones who'd voted, hadn't spoken my name where it wasn't asked. Because revenge wasn't the goal. Recognition wasn't the need. Structure was the solution. Let them cheer each other on, still blind to the patterns under their feet. Let them trade warm smiles and cold strategies. One day they'd stand on a field, shaped by my math, make decisions pre-written by my logic, and win games I'd orchestrated from a screen held together with tape. And when that day came, they wouldn't even know I'd been there at all. They started calling it the whisper system. I never gave it that name. I never gave it any name beyond the one in my internal files. But the phrase passed from one locker room to the next, between assistant coaches during smoke breaks, between scouts hunched behind clipboards in quiet bleachers, between captains who weren't sure if they were still in charge. Whisper system. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was around that time a message slipped into my inbox. No flashy subject line, no corporate greeting, just a line and a signature. You built something clean. Let's give it oxygen. Vervalon. I didn't know the name. But the email domain belonged to a sports analytics venture group based in Oslo, one that had recently backed 2 neurokinetic wearables and bought partial rights to a European streaming league. I read the message twice, then close it. For 3 days. I didn't respond. Not because I was uncertain, because I was calculating. On the 4th day, I met her, not in a glass tower, but in a cafe 3 blocks from a training facility I used to get kicked off for unauthorized field use. She arrived in gray slacks and a dark wool coat, her collar turned just slightly against the wind. Her expression was unreadable. Not cold, not warm, only efficient. Her briefcase looked heavier than it should, as though it carried things that didn't like being carried. We didn't shake hands, she sat, I sat. You've created leverage, she said, without introduction. I waited. She opened a small binder. Paper, not digital. Inside, a Strat Vibe report. One of mine, annotated in red ink. I want to scale it into Federation policy. You'll retain control, but you won't be seen. The word settled across the table like dust. You won't be seen. That was the agreement. No public image, no founder spotlight, not even an executive title on the press release. She wanted the product, not the man. And I needed the access, not the stage. The contract was 6 pages long. 6 lines mattered. Clause 7.1, all voting-based evaluation systems will be dissolved. Clause 9.3, coaching incentives shall align with verified player efficiency metrics. Clause 12.6, system architect retains all internal override access. I signed it beneath the shadow of a cappuccino cup. My name never appeared in the official release. The league adopted Strat Vibe at the start of the quarter. They didn't announce it with fireworks or conference fanfare. A quiet email arrived in every team inbox. To streamline equity and standardize development, the league will implement a performance-integrated analytics engine provided by Strat Vibe Technologies. All future evaluations shall comply with this format. No mention of origin. No need for applause. The change happened slowly on paper, but in practice, it moved like gravity. At first, coaches resisted. One complained the metrics were too sterile. Another called them numbers without soul. But after 3 game cycles, the patterns couldn't be ignored. Teams that followed Strat Vibe protocols had cleaner transitions, fewer injuries, higher pass integrity, star players weren't being overused and breaking midseason anymore. Underrated backups began climbing to starting rotations, not by vote, but by performance grade. I watched it unfold from the periphery. A former teammate of mine, once a showbolter praised for bringing energy, was quietly shifted to a lower squad. His energy hadn't vanished. It just wasn't efficient. The league never called it demotion. Strat Vibe didn't use that language. It used terms like reallocation, performance disparity, conformance latency. Cold terms, but accurate ones. I was invited to a strategy summit once. They didn't know it was me they were inviting. My name had been listed under technical liaison, a formality. I walked into the boardroom wearing black, collar up, no logo, no tags. The walls were pale gray, lit by ceiling panels that hummed with artificial calm. Every executive around the table wore precision-cut suits and carried opinions like weapons. They debated metrics like distance thresholds and field entropy scores. None of them looked at me directly. That was how I knew the system was working. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about inevitability. One coach, older, stiff in the shoulders, stood and asked, "So we're removing the human element from selection?" The lead analyst shook his head. Not removing it, just redefining it. A murmur passed. I didn't speak. Instead, I watched as an intern wheeled in a locked archive box. Someone had found the old team voting ballots, the ones we used to scribble names on behind each other's backs. They were faded, torn, some still folded in half like secrets never quite unfolded. The box was sealed and archived. No ceremony. No farewell. The gesture spoke louder than any speech. The room moved on. Back in my apartment, I pulled a fresh printout from the queue. It was a game sheet, match 21 of the new season. Under player selection algorithm, the final notation read, unanimous alignment with Strat Vibe priority grid. Manual override unnecessary. I pinned it beside the others. My wall was no longer a collection of memories. It was a blueprint of reform. I received a text late one night from an unknown number. Did you have anything to do with this system? Feels like you. There was no name attached, but I recognized the style. one of the midfielders who used to make fun of my after-practice drills. I didn't reply. The phone lit once more. He sent a photo, a close-up of the locker room bulletin board. At the top, where once the captain's pics had been posted, a new header glowed. Selections generated by StratVibe. I closed the phone, walked to the window. The skyline pulsed with building lights and unacknowledged change. Somewhere below, players laced their boots under new rules, unaware that every movement they made was weighed, scored, recorded. They were no longer playing in the system. They were playing for it. And I was the system. The city outside pulsed beneath a layer of soft cloud. It was late, the kind of hour that didn't belong to anyone. The only light in the room came from my screen, a clean white glow cast across the clutter of printed reports and half-sipped tea cooling near the edge of my desk. I hadn't spoken aloud in hours. StratVibe had been quiet tonight, until it wasn't. At exactly 2:41 a.m., the dashboard pulsed red. One slow blink, then another, the kind of alert the system didn't trigger often. Behavioral index deviation. My eyes narrowed as I leaned forward. 4 player tags rotated across the top panel, each flanked by a vertical decline graph and 3 orange markers. Ego conduction, elevated. Cohesion drift terminal. Strategic compliance breached. I clicked the first profile. The face on the screen appeared like a ghost breaking the surface of memory. Short, dark hair, sweat matted across a familiar forehead. The same mouth that used to laugh during drills I designed. The same player who once told me I analyzed more than I played. His performance values were in free fall. The second flag belonged to a forward, quick, flashy, high volume, but empty on the grid. He'd once passed me the ball with a smile meant for the bench. The third name made me pause. The captain. His file loaded slower, as if even the system hesitated. I read his markers without flinching. Verbal disruption, confirmed. Directed delay, confirmed. Locker room disunity index, critical. The fourth flag was someone I didn't recognize. Younger, a new recruit, likely mimicking the older ones, chasing bravado without substance. The software listed the resolution path. Reassignment protocol, Tier 2. Duration, indefinite. Status, requires clause activation. My hand hovered. The room felt impossibly still. They built their hierarchy on votes. I built mine on proof. I reached for the mouse, and the sensor lit beneath my fingers. A red circle blinked gently beneath the activate close command. I waited, not to enjoy the moment, to ensure I didn't. You're not here to watch them fall, you're here to remind them the system doesn't flinch. The mouse clicked once. The screen processed. The confirmation message didn't arrive with fanfare or sound. Protocol executed. Affected parties notified. Reassignment status, immediate. No appeal, no discussion, no locker room vote. I sat back. The chair creaked slightly under the shift in my posture. A strange tension settled beneath my collarbones. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter. Something colder. Justice shouldn't taste like anything. Otherwise, it's still a game. The next day's training session carried on like it always had, at least on the surface. I wasn't there in person. I watched the raw footage remotely from the data feed. A habit now, not a precaution. My access allowed me to view from silent towers and sideline cameras, each angle designed to study field dynamics, not facial expressions. Still, I saw it. The absence. 4 figures didn't step out of the locker room, their jerseys were laid out, pressed unclaimed. No one spoke about it, no one questioned the decision. Coaches adjusted drills without hesitating, players nodded instructions down the line. It was as if the ground shifted slightly to erase a footprint no one had been brave enough to acknowledge existed. I paused the video, rewound, zoomed in on the captain's locker. His name was still etched above the vent, tape worn at the edges, peeling like time had already started to forget him. Late afternoon, another message, this time from a head coach. I had my doubts. I don't anymore. That was all. Beneath the message, he had attached a screen grab from their own internal report. Compliance clause executed, no objection filed. Even the ones who once doubted the system had learned to bow to it. Not out of fear, out of results. I sat in my apartment well into the evening, lights off again, curtains pulled half open, to watch the wind shift a laundry line outside the adjacent building. A shirt twisted on its own axis, fighting air that couldn't be seen. I recognized the feeling. There had been nights years ago when I sat in rooms like this wondering why merit never carried the weight it promised, why performance bent to politics, why locker room laughs mattered more than late-night drills. Now silence had become the new applause. They weren't punished. They weren't shamed. They were simply deprioritized. And in this system, obscurity was a sharper sentence than exile. Later, my dashboard updated again. 3 new players flagged for cohesion game. All replacements, all statistically average, but functionally superior. The field didn't miss the old ones. Not because they weren't good, because they weren't necessary. I leaned forward and typed a note in the backend log. Deviation isn't failure, it's friction against refinement. Then I closed the screen. Before bed, I glanced at a box I kept in the closet, plain cardboard, sealed with packing tape that had been torn and relayered too many times. Inside were old jerseys. Fine, there's numbers faded, logos cracked. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some memories belong in containers, untouched, not because they hurt, but because they're finished. As I lay down, the ceiling above me blurred into a quiet gray, the color of things that no longer beg for validation. The system had spoken, and the field had listened. The bench camera held a wide angle. It captured everything in silence. The rigid line of substitutes sitting upright, hands clasped between knees, waiting for a name that wouldn't be called. The wind pressed faint ripples across their warm-up jackets. No movement, no conversation, only posture and absence. I played the footage back, this time slower. Row 3, seat 6. He was there, Arlen, the former captain. His expression hadn't changed much from our university days. Chin lifted, eyes forward, back unbowed. Except now, there was something hollow about the way he sat. The defiance was still there, but the context had vanished. He still thinks someone's watching. In the background, the stadium roared. A substitute sprinted past the bench line, shirt half pulled over his head, fans screaming as he joined the field. Arlen didn't even flinch. He scratched his arm absently, eyes trailing the sideline without focusing. The camera panned to the field. A new midfielder was taking the same position Arlen used to dominate. Younger, leaner, statistically inferior, but compliant. The system didn't measure age. It measured alignment. And alignment favored the willing. I muted the stream and leaned back in my chair. The room was dim, desk lamp on, but the rest left in dusk. I turned toward the shelf behind me. A single box sat there, closed but unsealed. Inside it, the old league programs. Team rosters from the previous year, Arlen's face on the cover of 3. I remembered one quote he gave a student interviewer once. "We don't need data to know who leads. You can feel it." I flipped through one of the programs. His jersey number had been printed in bold black across the spine. Now it hangs without dirt, without sweat, a number without a reason. Game day footage. Match 17. I watched from a remote terminal. A stadium feed split across 4 angles. The tunnel camera showed the lineup walk. Starters emerged to cheers, sponsor lights blinking on their shoulders. The bench squad trailed behind. There he was again, in uniform, still walking like he belonged. I paused the frame at the moment his foot crossed onto the pitch. The scoreboard above didn't flash his name. The announcers didn't list him in pre-match projections. And the digital merchandising banner didn't carry his face. He was present but unnamed. Visible but unmentioned. At halftime, I switched to the crowd cam. There was a booth outside the stadium where fans lined up for player autographs. It used to be the busiest part of the concourse. Now it was sparse. More digital screens than people, players seated at the table, pens in hand, smiles forced under branded lighting. In seat 3, Arlen sat with his marker uncapped. His smile flickered briefly at the approach of a child wearing a newer jersey, the one without his number. The child walked past, stopped at the 4th chair, asked the newer midfielder for a signature. Arlen capped his pen. Didn't look down, didn't look up. He just folded his hands on the table and waited for nothing. It's not exile, I thought. It's erasure. And that's worse. Exile is dramatic, loud. It turns you into a story. Erasure doesn't. It turns you into wallpaper. You're there, but not part of the image. Later that night, I received a compliance report from the League interface. It read like all the others, cold, tidy, strat vibe, flagged entities, no further action required, non-impact status confirmed. I stared at the word non-impact for a long time. Not underperforming. Not disruptive. Just irrelevant. A concept more final than failure. That weekend, the players were listed again on the digital benchboard. The game played on. They sat. The field shifted around them like a stage that had no role left for their shape. Plays unfolded, strategies realigned. The system recalibrated without a single apology. It didn't need to hate them to remove them. It only needed indifference. I opened an older file on my system. The match where I was first benched at university. I watched the play where I assisted, the pass that set the goal, the block that didn't make the highlight reel. Then the end, where I sat on our bench while others were lifted, applauded, photographed. Paused on my younger face, sweat dock hair, expression composed. A ghost in training clothes. Then I pressed forward. Back to the present, to the new ghosts. Sitting there in front of thousands, invisible again. They used to call it the dream, to wear the jersey, feel the lights, walk the tunnel. But dreams don't stay dreams when they're reduced to a seat and a silence. Around midnight, I opened a new internal note file. I typed 3 words. Witness without weight. Then I closed the file without saving it. Some truths don't need to be archived. They live in the replay. I arrived 3 hours before kickoff. The stadium was a creature breathing light, every steel beam humming, every screen rotating through sponsor logos like prayer flags in a digital monastery. The sky above it was a deep navy, cloudless, and stretched like velvet, stitched over something ancient and waiting. The pass in my pocket didn't say my name. It said Logistics Oversight Strat Vibe. The security staff at the gate didn't ask for ID. They scanned the badge, smiled faintly, and waved me in. The system, after all, knew who I was, even when no one else did. My coat was black, collar up, shoulders squared. The fabric was heavy but not burdensome. It reminded me of formal wear at a funeral. Polite, sharp, deliberate. I walked the private corridor without pause. I'd memorized the layout months ago. The executive suite was quiet. White leather seating, a glass wall that stretched from floor to ceiling, separating the watchers from the watched. There was no one else inside yet. The silence felt earned. Below me, the field unrolled like a memory finally cleaned of noise. The lines were sharp. The logos were set. The team benches buzzed in muted preparation, bodies in motion, coaches checking their earpieces. A large digital display began its pre-match cycle, powered by Strat Vibe. The letters bloomed in pure white, overlaid on a backdrop of fluid data threads, charts curved gently, like breath held mid-exhale. I used to be below this glass, I thought. Now it's my reflection staring down. Someone entered. 2 executives in gray suits whispered about ad placement metrics. Neither looked in my direction. A staff assistant nodded once, careful not to make eye contact. That was fine. I didn't come to be recognized. I came to be seen. The anthem started. Below, the teams lined up. Cameras swept past them with practiced rhythm. Players placed hands on chests. Some looked up at the flags, others closed their eyes. And then, movement. From the far right column of the lineup, a figure turned. Not deliberately, not as a gesture. It was instinct, some flicker in the corner of his eye that drew him toward the suite's window. It was Arlen. Same frame, same jawline, hair slightly grayer now, but cut in the same athletic discipline. Our eyes met across the arena. He didn't blink. Neither did I. There was no anger in his expression. Not surprise, either. Only the slow dawning realization of how far below me he now stood, and how long I'd been watching. I didn't smile. That would have been sentimental. I did nod. That would have been theatrical. I only looked at him until he looked away. The stadium's sound system surged. The crowd roared. Lights dimmed, then pulsed. And then the Jumbotron began its final sponsor cycle. Names of energy brands, sportswear lines, fitness partners, all rotated in neat, confident order. Then the screen locked. Strat vibe. The letters froze, slightly larger than before. Beneath it, a second line appeared. Engineered by D. Holt. It lingered longer than the rest. 5 seconds. 10. Then faded into transition. No cheers. No applause. But below, one of the assistant coaches glanced up at the display, brow furrowing. 2 midfielders followed his gaze. Arlen didn't look again. He had already understood. In the suite, the executives had noticed the same thing. One of them whispered something about the name, asked if D. Holt was an engineering subcontractor. Another answered, it's probably a back-end guy, legacy system maybe. I turned away from the glass. Their voices fell behind me like background music in a scene not about them. Legacy system. They weren't wrong. I stepped toward the far end of the suite where a small console screen tracked match telemetry. Pass completion rates, kinetic drag, field sector velocity. Strat vibes language. The interface blinked once, as if acknowledging its creator. I touched the glass gently, not to interact, only to feel the vibration of something that once existed in my imagination, now breathing beneath real hands, real feet. This isn't about them anymore, not about revenge, not about retribution. This is about architecture, about silence that becomes structure. The match began. I watched it play out like a conductor who no longer needed a baton. The movements were tighter, pass lanes cleaner. No wasted motion. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And yet, beneath all the metrics and manufactured calm, something unexpected pulled at me. A ripple, subtle and nearly forgotten. Not pride, not triumph, closure. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that comes when the ghosts you carried stop following you, not because they've forgiven you, but because they've become irrelevant. The crowd roared again as the first goal was scored. Camera crews darted along the edge of the pitch, the players sprinted into formation resets, the lights blazed white and gold. I stood alone, behind glass at the edge of everything they thought they built. And for the first time, I allowed myself to close my eyes. The suite emptied slowly. Executives filed out with the rhythm of men who had been trained not to linger. They murmured about second-half predictions, sponsor bonuses, quarterly reports. None of them glanced in my direction, not out of disrespect, but because I had never been introduced. I was a silhouette in a logistical title, a role without a name. That's how I had written it. I waited until the lights dimmed for halftime. Then I stood, adjusted the collar of my coat, and walked past the untouched tray of bottled water and name cards, toward the elevator no one used unless they were meant to disappear. The descent was soundless. The mirror across the back wall reflected my posture in still fragments. My reflection didn't look triumphant. It didn't look bitter. It looked finished. I stepped out into a service corridor under the stands, fluorescent lit, cool, humming with the faint buzz of systems operating beyond sight. The walls were lined with crates labeled for technical crews and ground support. The hallway turned sharply into a descending ramp with no signage. Only one door at the end, unmarked. My footsteps echoed in low rhythm. I passed a janitor who was wheeling a mop bucket. He didn't look up. Didn't need to. Somewhere above me, the crowd roared again. A second goal, maybe. Or a missed penalty? I didn't check. I wasn't here to witness the match, I was here to witness the aftermath. At the far end of the corridor, just before the exit tunnel, two league officials stood talking near a maintenance panel. They were both in standard issue jackets, logo embroidered neatly, earpieces tucked just beneath their collars. I caught only a thread of the conversation as I passed. He changed the league. That guy? He was here tonight. The other one tilted his head. Which guy? The one who built the Strat Vibe backend, D. Holt, and a pause, then a small chuckle. Haha, never seen his photo. You're not supposed to. I kept walking, didn't look back. The tunnel sloped upward toward the parking sector, narrow and silent, a sharp contrast to the orchestral thunder of the stadium above. The floor bore faint scuff marks, footsteps that came before, none of them mine. At the mouth of the tunnel, light spilled through like the end of a film reel. It wasn't dramatic light. It wasn't golden. It was clear, plain, morning after light. The kind that tells you the show is over and the world remains unchanged and uncelebrated. I stood there for a moment, letting it stretch across my face. And then I stepped into it. Outside, the wind moved gently. Banners still flapped on the upper tiers. They read, Finals 34, Precision, Purpose, Power. Below the main gates, fans lined up at mobile food trucks, arguing over highlight plays, jerseys slung over shoulders. No one noticed the man in black walking along the stadium's outer ring. No one pointed. That was the victory. Not that I had won, that I had made the win unnecessary. Back in my apartment, I took the old team photo down from the shelf. It had been taped behind the laminated cohesion graphs, untouched for months. I slid it from its sleeve and looked at the faces again. We were younger there, smiling like we had all been promised something permanent. They voted me off that year. Twice. No apology, no regret. I held the photograph over the waste bin for a long second, then folded it once, carefully, and slid it back into the frame. Behind the system schematics it now lived beneath. It didn't deserve erasure. It deserved context. Later that night, the league's website posted its standard end-of-season archive. New metrics summary, awards breakdown, final standings. In the small text policy section at the bottom of the page, a footnote was added. As of this season, all player evaluations, selections, and coaching bonuses are formally governed by StratVibe systems. The traditional vote-based structure has been fully retired. And there were no announcements, no interviews. The decision had already been lived into reality. The system was the scoreboard. Now, I walked out onto the apartment balcony, leaned against the cold metal railing, and let the wind press faintly against my chest. The street below pulsed with quiet motion, cars gliding, lights flickering, somewhere between rush and rest. Behind me, on the desk, the StratVibe monitor sat on standby. Its screen blinked once. Not a warning. My heart beat. The game would play on tomorrow. Another generation would walk into tryouts, unaware that charisma no longer trumped contribution. And the names of those who voted me out? They wouldn't be mentioned in any broadcast. They wouldn't be cursed. They wouldn't be remembered. They'd been replaced in silence. Like players whose numbers never got called again. I exhaled once, then turned to the door. The wind didn't follow. Neither did the past. They can still play. But the scoreboard, it will always be mine. Some of us were never picked first, not because we weren't good enough, because we didn't play their game. They said we were too serious, too focused, too different. They laughed while we worked, they talked while we watched, and while they built friendships, we built systems. Subscribe if you believe in quiet moves, smart victories, and the kind of story where no one claps. Until the rules change.